He harasses me on every occasion, belittles my merits, interferes with my household duties in general, does not give me any life. The funny thing is that my mother-in-law, Emily, is a wonderful woman. We found a common language from the first days of acquaintance. She taught me how to cook her recipes, and we even went to the theater together, sometimes with her friends. We had long conversations over tea, discussing everything from literature to family traditions. Emily has always been a beacon of warmth and support in my life, and I truly cherish our shared bond. With my father-in-law, Richard, on the other hand, things were very different. I tried everything: gifts, surprises, tickets to soccer games, but nothing worked. I literally tried everything, but he just got angrier and angrier. One day, I couldn't take it anymore. I went over to their house while Emily was out running errands, and I brought an apple pie, the kind Richard likes. I thought a gesture like that might make a difference. He was in the living room, arranging chess pieces on a board. The room was dimly lit, and as soon as I entered, tension hung in the air. I knocked softly on the doorframe, and he turned, frowning at the sight of me. I put on a friendly smile and said, "Hi, Richard. I just got here and brought you some apple pie. Would you like to try some?" He gave me a grim look, then turned back to his chess and muttered, "I'll be there in 5 minutes." I went to the kitchen to wait, feeling awkward, as if waiting for a verdict. The kitchen was silent, only the clock on the wall ticking, and every second seemed like an eternity. 5 minutes later, Richard did come in. He took a piece of pie, tasted it, wrinkled his face, and swallowed it with obvious difficulty. I sat and waited for his reaction, even though it was clear that it wasn't going to be a pleasant conversation. Richard sighed heavily and said, "It's pointless that you keep coming here and testing my patience. It's not infinite, you know." I froze in bewilderment as he continued, "I can't stand to see you anymore. You're driving me crazy." At first, I didn't realize what he meant. His words hung in the air, and I felt my stomach churn. Richard took my hand and squeezed it tightly, his grip almost painful. I stared at him, still confused. He looked directly at me, almost spitting out the words. "How could my worthless son end up with you?" "What are you saying?" I asked. My voice was a barely audible whisper, and my heart was pounding in my chest. Richard shook his head and suddenly pushed me onto the couch. I gasped, pressing myself against the backrest, still not realizing what was happening. He stood over me, his eyes filled with both anger and something else: desire. The room was stuffy, the air filled with tension. I was barely aware of what was happening, and my thoughts were racing. "Haven't you realized yet that I like you?" he said, his voice low and almost trembling. I almost forgot how to breathe, but still managed to answer, "I thought you hated me." I struggled to get the words out, and I felt my pulse quicken. He laughed softly, a sound that seemed so inappropriate under the circumstances. "No, I don't hate you at all," he said, leaning closer and running his hand through my hair. His touch made my insides flutter, a strange mixture of fear and arousal. Before I knew it, I was reaching for him, and he kissed my forehead, a greedy kiss that left no space between us. I melted into the moment, letting myself savor his unexpected caress. It was as if all the tension and confusion suddenly made sense in this intense connection. His hands moved to my waist, pulling me closer, and I could feel the intensity of his emotions. That day changed our entire relationship. From then on, whenever I went to visit him, Richard no longer frowned. On the contrary, he seemed to glow like the sun, his demeanor completely transformed. Sometimes we'd spend time together, away from Emily's watchful eyes. The mystery added a thrill I hadn't expected, and each encounter made me want more. Richard would find excuses to be alone with me, helping me carry groceries, or simply asking me to stay late after dinner to discuss something trivial. The tension between us was always palpable, and I found myself drawn to him in ways I couldn't understand. One afternoon, after Emily had gone away for the weekend with friends, Richard invited me over to his place under the pretense of needing help with household repairs. My heart raced as I approached their house, knowing full well what might happen. When I arrived, Richard greeted me with a warmth that was so different from his usual coldness. He led me into the living room, where we sat down and looked at me with such intensity that I trembled. He pulled my hand again, more gently this time, and whispered, "I've been thinking about you nonstop." His confession took my breath away. The vulnerability in his eyes was like nothing I'd ever seen before. He leaned in, and our lips met again, this time more gently, more deliberately. It wasn't just desire, it felt like something deeper, something that scared me but also pleased me. We spent the rest of the day together, talking in high-pitched tones, sharing secrets I never imagined I'd tell him. He talked about his frustrations, regrets, and the loneliness that had consumed him over the years. I listened, feeling a strange bond forming between us, a bond that was both wrong and irresistible. When we parted that evening, I realized that things would never be the same again. From that day on, Richard's behavior became completely different. He smiled more, laughed more, and had a lightness about him that I had never noticed before. Whenever I went to visit him, he found ways to be close to me, his eyes always following me around the room. Emily, unsuspecting, continued to be herself, and I often felt guilt, but it was always overshadowed by the attraction I felt for Richard. The change in our relationship was undeniable. Richard glowed like the sun, and I basked in the warmth of his newfound affection. The complexity of what we were doing, the secrecy, the danger, all made it impossible to turn away. So we went on, tangled in a web of emotions from which neither of us could escape.